Welcome to CACHE, the portable professional development podcast from CACHE Alumni. CACHE Alumni is the fastest growing association of professionals in care, health and education, and we're happy to have you here. This is where you'll hear from specialists and experts from across our network. Here's what's coming up.
I found that I actually felt quite kind of lonely, and I found that routine almost disguised the fact that maybe I did have some kind of mental health issues, or I did have some thought processes which I'd never really dwelled upon.
Let's jump in to this week's episode.
My name's Jawad Bhattie. I'm sort of born and bred Blackburn. If you're my mother, then my name is Jawad. So that's the correct pronunciation. However, all my life I've just been called Jawad because that's how you kind of spell my name. Yeah, I kind of grew up in kind of Blackburn. It's kind of a working class area, and I kind of saw through an early age, a lot of deprivation and social problems. So I didn't grow up necessarily with a silver spoon. However, I was brought up by my mother, and she kind of instilled in us some really good, strong kind of values. She was a migrant. She came across from Pakistan, but she was educated, so she managed to kind of land a job in kind of education, teaching. From what I recollect from a very early age, she was doing kind of 3 shifts. So she was working primary school, and then she was doing adult classes, teaching South Asian women sort of English in college, and after that, she was doing a lot of voluntary work as well with our community, again, to try and empower, South Asian women to kind of go out there and, get educated, get jobs, don't be dependent on anyone. She was a very strong ethos in terms of, grafting, working. And I guess that rubbed off on me a bit, although I was quite interested in gaming and programming and very geeky stuff, and also football and watching TV. At the same time, she said, look, as a bare minimum, you've got to go to, her expectation was, look, get an education, and then after that, hopefully you've got something which, you can fall back on if you don't succeed in what you want to do. So again, went through sort of the education system, and really focused on kind of IT and data more specifically. So I've always been, fascinated in bringing, this sounds really nerdy, but bringing loads and loads of, if you can imagine a massive Excel spreadsheet, and you've got, hundreds of thousands of rows, it's really how do I kind of translate that into maybe 5 or 6 bullet points that a stakeholder can understand really quickly. And data analysis is something that I've then kind of focused on for 20 plus years of my life, and hopefully helping organizations improve and better the customer experience, better the customer service. That's kind of what I've done kind of professionally. I'm sort of that, and then I guess where I'm potentially going to link it to kind of what I'm doing now is, so I did that up until kind of 2000, and then obviously we got hit by the pandemic. I guess what the pandemic did for me, aside from us being locked up and not being able to do X, Y, and Z, was I went through a period of self-discovery, and I kind of realised that although I did have family, friends still kind of accessible over the phone, over a video call, I found that I actually felt quite kind of lonely, and I found that routine almost disguised the fact that, maybe I did have some kind of mental health issues, or I did have some thought processes which I'd never really dwelled upon, because you get so busy, work, exercise, or eating, or socializing, you do tend to kind of forget about yourself. Went through a period of kind of self-discovery over the course of call it lockdown, and kind of realised that, look, I didn't feel okay at certain times, and, I've always been a little bit kind of sensitive since childhood, but I guess it was kind of amplified a bit as I realised that, look, routine can't disguise the fact that, at certain times I do feel very low, I do feel very lonely, I do feel depressed, and, being a man and also from a South Asian background, you kind of, taboo times X amount, you don't talk about these things. I remember kind of high school, and this is kind of going back to the kind of 80s and early 90s, where if you did display any sense of kind of sensitivity, there was a lot of homophobia around, and that you would get kind of abused, in a homophobic fashion if you displayed any kind of sensitivity. So, it's kind of all locked in, and it's all, pent up. And then, for me, that was kind of a crucial period where I thought, hang on a sec, I don't feel okay. Is there anyone else who doesn't feel okay? So then I kind of, created what I, would do anyway is kind of some kind of a research process, some kind of a poll, or in my case, I created a Facebook group, and I'm not promoting Facebook at all. I thought the easiest thing to do was I'll create a little group called Mental Health Chat and just see how it goes. So then obviously my kind of network latched upon it, and then other people joined, and over the course of a couple of years, it's gone from 0 to just over 400 people have actually joined, and people started sharing things, and obviously I'm going to keep it confidential, but it kind of, for me, that was a little bit of validation. I'm going to say, mental health is a big problem. And at the time, I'll be honest, I think definitely the pandemic and the coronavirus has amplified the kind of thinking around mental health. So in a very kind of weird way, it's been good in that sense, because a lot more people have actually come forward, including myself. So, I did this kind of mini validation, and I thought, right, I might be onto something here where we might need to do something. And I didn't know what that was. So lockdown ended, went back to work, and then I guess I took this little kind of journey with me to the workplace. And I thought, outside of work, okay, and sorry, as part of that process, I actually reached out and joined many different kind of self-help groups like Andy's Man Club, Talk Ourselves Well. This is kind of in my kind of locality, and I've got nothing but praise for these organisations. And this is kind of really constructive, the only constructive thing that I thought was sometimes accessibility and being able to get to a certain location at a certain time. But other than that, they are fantastic, and I highly recommend them to any kind of middle-aged man who has got some mental health problems. So yeah, went back to the workplace, and again started kind of asking people, my peers, my colleagues, HR personnel, management, what do we do about mental health in the workplace? So, because when you go back to when you go from remote to kind of back in the office or the workplace, or even hybrid, you kind of start realizing that, hang on a sec, I actually spend the majority of my time in work, or even when you're remote, let's be really simple and say 9 to 5. 9 to 5, you are kind of locked into your job, for example. And, aside from being, a little bit of flexibility of doing a school run here and there, essentially you are locked in, 9 to 5. So the majority of your time you are working and dealing with colleagues. So what is actually being done? So went through almost a big list of, these are all the kind of employee assistance programs and free therapy for staff members, some fantastic, applications, some fantastic therapists. And again, it's literally, here's an app, or here's a link, or here's a phone number to the employee. Fill your boots, if you're feeling down, just ring this number. And this is going to sound potentially really bad, but I mean it in a nice way. I kind of deemed that to be a little bit of a kind of signposting, and the organisation kind of washing the hands of that employee. So although that employee is a part and parcel of your organisation, they're a critical part in generating the revenue, be that through fantastic customer service, or actually being on the sales line, or being in IT, supporting the infrastructure. That employee is actually giving their heart and soul to that organisation. And for me, I just felt that just giving someone a number and expecting them to just run with it and not really following it up was kind of inadequate, in my opinion.
It can be hard, can't it? So if someone's already made the leap to tell someone that they're struggling or to ask for help, to then have to go and do that again can be difficult.
100%. When I went back to the workplace, you could say for about 12 months, I was kind of just being very nosy, asking a lot of questions, asking a lot of people. And the consensus was that, like you said, we've plucked up the courage to do this. and we've been kind of semi-dismissed. And I don't mean that, again, in a bad way. The individual who has referred them has got the best intentions in mind, and what they've probably been advised with is, look, we've invested thousands of pounds in this kind of employee assistance platform. We have to utilise it. And so the kind of helper is saying, look, can you give this a try? What, having spoken to people, is what tends to happen is that initial kind of leap of faith hasn't been kind of repaid. So that confidence level diminishes, and more often than not, that person will not use that platform, unfortunately, because the cry for help hasn't been heard. Of those who kind of then actually go and use these platforms, again, what I've heard is, we spoke to the therapist, spoke to them for about 15-20 minutes. They were fantastic at listening, but then they said, look, we're not that type of therapist. You need to go back into the application, look for this tag or search for this type of, specific mental health problem. And again, it's like, I've just cried out my kind of emotions and my feelings to you. To do that again is really going to be difficult. And again, so you see a lot more kind of drop off. And then, so that's from the kind of employee perspective. From an employer perspective, or an organisational HR, health and wellbeing, however you want to put it, what they say is, look, we don't actually know the impact of what these platforms are giving our employees. So we've been given a remit that, look, this is what we invested in. They're fantastic tools. They're getting 5-star ratings on Apple Store and Google Store. So they should be good tools, but we've got absolutely no kind of feedback loop in terms of, are we seeing a demonstrable improvement in kind of mental health and behaviour and mood within our workplace? The statistics based upon absenteeism, and people leaving the organisation, they're still skyrocketing. We don't see that diminishing in any way. So it's difficult for us to really grasp, and this is kind of even looking at it from a commercial perspective, are we seeing any value in this kind of platform, in this tool? That's where I've kind of almost said, right, I'll put my kind of data hat on, I'll put my kind of life living experience and all this kind of research and speaking to people, and I'll kind of devise something which may or may not be useful. What I did was I kind of took a bit of a leap of faith, kind of left my day job, call it, and decided to go all in and see if I could almost come up with some kind of a tool where within a workplace, within an organisation, employees could potentially have some form of therapy, but also the organisation could pull out some fantastic insights in terms of the mental health or behaviour of their employees within the workplace, coupled with tangible steps to try and maybe improve the kind of health and well-being within the workplace. So I kind of set about working with Blackburn College, who are my kind of local college, working with staff members there, and also some of the older students around what would potentially be a really easy to use tool. The thing we kind of thought about was, people still do journaling. People still kind of log how they're feeling. You go to any kind of stationery store and there's a dedicated section on journaling, books, diaries, however you want to kind of term them. So it is a proven form of kind of self-help therapy as well. I thought this was kind of something we can potentially start with. So we set about a little bit of a trial with kind of members of the college, and then I kind of analysed. Within that as well, there were a couple of surveys as well, which are readily available to kind of use from the NHS. From that trial, I analysed the mood, the behaviour, the kind of health and well-being, the burnout risk, and came back with some startling statistics to the organisation. And the HR team there were kind of thinking, this is quite interesting and something we definitely would not have had visibility through any other kind of platform that's currently out there. So then I thought, right, okay, that's my little bit of further validation. So from that point, I set about, right, improving the kind of journaling experience. So there's now currently a kind of journaling app out there called Spark, and that's kind of free to download for any person, because what I didn't want to do was to kind of, I guess, make the barrier of entry for someone who is potentially suffering and needs a free-to-use tool to have that barrier. So it's a kind of free-to-use journaling app that's readily available at the moment. We went live a few weeks ago, so people can install, it's got a journaling facility. You can log and schedule habits. So, you might want to set yourself a reminder to go for a walk, because things like that do actually help us with our mental health, whether it's going to the gym and things like that. And there's also kind of motivational quotes. So it's kind of a simplistic application that's free to use, but hopefully effective. And then what I've since been doing as well is working with organizations to get their users to kind of use that app, and then present back some of these statistics and insights. Again, it's kind of where you can actually see, does the kind of mood improve? How does it fluctuate in the month? So, maybe at the month end, particularly if you're part of kind of the finance department, for example, you'll be dealing with a lot of invoices, and it can get quite stressful. If you're customer service and you're leading up to kind of seasonality, you could get fluctuations in kind of mood and behavior. And then at the same time, based upon the kind of habits that people have logged, we can actually measure tangible improvement in kind of mood after someone, for example, has gone for a walk. And because you're looking at data, and just to kind of highlight, it is completely anonymized. No one at either end knows who is looking at whose data, because it's all aggregated. And at no stage does it actually say, we've got one user who looks like this. It's completely anonymized. Within the app as well, it actually says, create a nickname. So, none of your data is ever kind of publicized. Presenting those stats back to the organization, where they can actually see a bit like a kind of story where, we've currently got 30% kind of, call it a mood score, and, with the best being 100%. And, why are we currently at 30%? That's because, we've got 20% of people, we've got a 20% happiness score, we've got a 30% vitality score, and then, burnout is probably about 70%. Here are some of the kind of trigger words and themes based upon what is driving these scores. So it could be working long hours. We've got, we're being asked to come into the office. We want hybrid. So it's kind of, presenting the why things are happening, and also then, how you can potentially alleviate or improve. So, going at the kind of habits and how, they do improve the mental health. And it gives you a percentage that, look, if you introduce, say, walking Wednesdays in your organization, you should see a 10% improvement in mood, because people, who have kind of used this app are saying this. So it presents back a very kind of tangible, data-led, insight-driven solution to the organization, where the employee feels that they're a part of that organization, because the organization is actually taking tangible steps based upon the data that is being driven by the user. So, the strapline for Spark is, honesty is the key to Spark change, and, it's driven by the kind of grassroots, the user, and, in effect, the organization is then, enabled to kind of make improvements, continuously. So it's kind of never ending, really. And, hopefully it will kind of lead to organizations using the scoring as a badge of honor. So, we want all organizations in the UK to be really kind of invested in their staff members, and, we want them to improve the retention, to improve the recruitment of people, to, improve productivity and reduce presenteeism, and, people being absent for kind of mental health related reasons. And I think, one of the key things is organizations having, hopefully, these kind of levels of insights can make the employee feel that, look, we are absolutely invested in you, and we are taking these tangible steps, and these are the improvements we're seeing.
Why Spark? Where did the name come from?
I guess it goes back to the kind of pandemic. What was the spark that made me think about my mental health? What was that kind of, trigger? Trigger itself is a bad word, I guess, within mental health. So and for various reasons, it's a bad word. But spark for me was kind of, and it has got connotation. Every word's got other connotations. But for me, spark was, look, what's that kind of spark? What's that motivation? What's that little driver that can make us start thinking about our mental health? And it's that, I guess, it's that spark to hopefully look, can we actually do something? And yes, we can, because through spark we can hopefully drive change. So it's that thought process, that little click for us all to just take a moment out and think about mental health.
That's great. And the idea of it being a journal is actually particularly fascinating to me. I actually bought a journal at the weekend because I realised that I do a lot of talking and communicating and sort of sharing about how I feel, and I have a bit of a personal mantra that I want to be as human as possible. So I never answer the question, how are you, with a stock oh, I'm good, thanks, how are you? I'm always fairly honest. And although people don't always actually want the honest response when they ask how you are, I feel like it's really important to be more human, especially when we're all very separate from each other now and everything's behind that wall of social media squares and all of that sort of fakeness where everybody's trying to build a personal brand and all of those sorts of things. So I'm really good at sharing, which means that I'm really good at talking about my mental health and about the things I struggle with and asking for help.
This is Podcash, brought to you by CACHE Alumni. If you're enjoying this conversation, please use your podcast app to follow or subscribe, so you never miss an episode.
There's a lot of stuff that sharing doesn't necessarily help with, and I'd stumbled across a post on social media by an organisation called Move and Mind UK, and they were talking about how people who are struggling with maybe making the right choices around their diet or around doing some exercise, or who are struggling to build good habits, can find that if the journal, that it can help them to get through that, because there's something very specific about journaling that can help you to, I suppose, get more insights about yourself that you wouldn't necessarily get through that chat that you might get through talking to somebody else. Was that something that you found in terms of research and that stuff around why you journal?
I've spoken to a lot of therapists as well, and psychologists, and obviously you can get almost lost in that science alone. It's a vast field. But coming back to just the kind of journaling element, one of the things that, and coming back to your point of being kind of raw, and coming back to the kind of spark mantra of honesty, one of the things that in discussing with these therapists, I kind of established was, look, we owe it to ourselves to kind of be genuine, be raw. There's nothing wrong with if we wake up on a Monday morning and we're not feeling good, and we can't really put a finger on why that is. And there's nothing wrong with a middle-aged man like myself logging in my journal, I woke up this morning, I had a fantastic weekend, I did this, did that, but I've just woke up this morning. I don't know whether it's kind of the Monday blues, but I'm feeling down. So firstly, 100% in terms of agreeing with what you say, and moving away from almost this kind of artificial filter that we put on social media where everything is hunky-dory when really it isn't. So we do owe it to ourselves, and we do need to do a lot more self-care, and just kind of inward looking at kind of how do we generally feel. So there's kind of that element, and then coupled with other kind of discussions where one of the things that some therapists have said is, look, once you've logged it, and you could almost kind of scroll back and see 2 months ago I was feeling like this, or where you kind of can reflect, and this is your kind of journal, this is you in essence, and your historical record of kind of how you're feeling. So one of the things that's kind of built into Spark is, again, in complete privacy, where you can actually look back, and hopefully you will also kind of potentially log where and I've went for a walk and I feel really good, or I've done this. So again, for you, and one of the things, I want to put my hand up and say, look, what we're looking at Spark is probably So let's say there's when you hit crisis point, you absolutely have to get medication. You absolutely have to speak to someone clinical even and get treatment. So Spark is absolutely not replacing that. What Spark is doing is it's this kind of iceberg effect of, let's say there's 80%, 90% of people who don't actually know they've got a mental health problem and they haven't quite hit crisis point. But we want to really get to these people before they hit crisis point, and for the organisation to put some steps in for the app to provide some suggestions where we can hopefully help those people before they hit crisis point. So within Spark, I'm not absolutely saying it's the kind of solution to everything, and there is definitely a need and a place for clinical treatment as well. And I would urge people that if you do hit a certain level, please do ensure that you do reach out to the necessary people for that.
If you think back in history, like everyone used to keep a diary, didn't they? Like before the internet existed and before we had like technology, everyone kept a diary so that they could work through those things, like almost like writing a letter to yourself. And I can totally see how that would make a difference. The other thing that really interested us was the idea of like that reflection piece and looking back, because I suppose it's not just about looking back and saying, look how far I've come, I used to feel worse than this, but also I remember when I did my mental health first aid training, that sometimes it's helpful to be able to look back and say things have been better before, so I know things can be better again.
Light at the 100%.
That's really good.
Yeah, and so just to add to that, I've again, personal experience. I've been in dark places where all I see is anguish. All I see is darkness, and I can't see any light. And you've hit the nail on the head there. Where no, hang on a sec. There is always light there. And sometimes it's that struggle or challenge to get to that light, but it does exist, and by looking back and reflecting, you can see it, and that's the beauty of journaling.
Yeah, one of the things, I only started my journal yesterday because it arrived on Saturday. One of the things that I was quite careful about when I went shopping for my journal was making sure that it was a guided journal, because the idea of a blank page terrified us, because what do you write in a journal? Like, again, like everybody used to keep a diary, but we've fallen out of that habit, I suppose. We'll only write things that we're going to share now. So I knew I wouldn't be any good with a notebook that I was going to use as a journal. It had to have prompts to let us figure out what to think about. Is that something that happens in Spark? Are there prompts? Are there things that spark ideas for people to be able to write in their journal?
Yeah, so within Spark, it kind of, there's a little bit of guidance in terms of you almost determine. Firstly, you would determine how do you feel, and it's kind of the kind of smiley to kind of sad faces, and from there you can actually then log what's the kind of nature of how you're feeling, and really that's where you're then potentially guided a little bit in terms of I'm feeling positive, for example, and okay, what are you feeling positive about, type of thing. So I wouldn't say it's definitely not the kind of final position, because we've been live, and what I want to do is to be kind of user driven, and like you've said, do we need more prompts? Do we need more reminders? I think with an app, the only problem with kind of prompts and reminders is does it get too invasive, and you want it to be a smooth experience. So 100%, I think, and at no stage am I even saying that traditional diary journaling is going to be kind of put on the shelf and never used again. I firmly believe you can use Spark and even a traditional journal, because with Spark, what you've got is you can create habits as well. So even if you just wanted to use Spark to kind of log, right, I'm feeling this way, I'm going to kind of schedule a habit, and then if you're into chart, there's a line graph of, again, there's a historical journaling, but there's a line graph as well of how your mood has potentially fluctuated. So a bit like the organisation view, where holistically they can see the organisation, this is how the mood kind of fluctuates over the course of the month. You've got your personalised version as well, where you can see, where there's been ups and downs, and then you can go back to your kind of journal, I guess, within the app, or even your hard journal, and look back at, like, okay, this is why I was kind of feeling this way. So what Spark enables you to do is it kind of improves the digital experience, I guess. It harnesses what you can do through digital, and it complements. I'm not in competition with anyone, I'll be honest with you. I believe this is kind of a unique proposition for the organization as well as the workplace. But in terms of if you were to use Spark as a personal tool, 100% you can use it as a complementary to if you're having clinical treatment, if you're using a physical journal, if your therapy is kind of socializing, speaking with people. Honestly, you can still use Spark whenever, as ever you want to do. It's purely a complementary tool for you to use as and when you want.
When you first started talking about your background in data and that sort of data analytics and thinking about that stuff, there will be people in our audience who thought, well, what's this got to do with me? Because obviously you yourself are a member of CACHE Alumni, and the service is set up to support people who work in care, health, early years and education. It's really fascinating thinking about your entry into this sector and like how you became involved in like sort of care relevant work, because traditionally you would not be our audience as a data analytics person. Tell us about leaving your job to pursue this. That sounds terrifying.
And honestly, what I want to say is reiterating the point that Spark is not a replacement for seeing a therapist, seeing your doctor, your GP. Those individuals and those teams are doing a fantastic service with the kind of resources that they have, unfortunately. So this is absolutely not kind of replacing or suggesting this is a better alternative to that. What we're trying to do at Spark is literally that spark. You're feeling down, I'm feeling down, but we don't know why. Can Spark help us to kind of understand ourselves a bit better in that process, help the organisation improve everyone's health and well-being better? So that's kind of, I just wanted to kind of add that. But just in terms of kind of my journey. So going back to traditional kind of data, corporate, absolutely not connected with anyone in kind of health, education. But for me, it was something where I had a couple of kind of incidents, call it, from a sort of personal experience, which I think 2 months later I kind of left corporate. So one of the kind of experiences was where I reported in the workplace bullying. I reported it, I escalated it. Nothing was done about it. It was kind of buried under the carpet. That for me was, hang on a sec, this potentially is something critical, something I feel passionate about, and nothing's being done. That was one kind of aspect. And secondly was my kind of personal journey as well of, it wasn't until I actually moved away from the workplace, albeit kind of remotely, albeit due to lockdown, that I started my own mental health journey. So there were a couple of factors which kind of said to me, look, there's definitely something missing in the workplace. There's definitely, even if you look at it from a kind of commercial perspective, identified, look, there's a niche here. Currently, going back to my point about employee assistance programs and existing support, it tends to be driven by professionals who are, professionals in the healthcare industry. They are doing a fantastic job, like I said. However, in terms of then providing some insights and data analysis back to the organization, because for me, the missing link is the organization getting some data back where, okay, we are doing something with the employees, we know we're doing something, but are we actually effecting change and improvement?
That's the same even when an organisation has something like mental health first aiders. So I'm really lucky to work for an organisation who are actually quite good at this stuff, in that there is lots of support. There are mental health first aiders. There is actionable help. So from the minute you say, I am having a problem, there's a group of people who can help you to work your way through that. And there isn't that handoff, although there are less hands-on things you can. So we do have an employee assistance program, and we do have all of those other things if people are more comfortable going down that route. But the same challenge exists in that that's all confidential, and because it's very human, there's not necessarily a way to report that stuff back in a way that anonymises it or makes it less personal to that person who's been pouring their heart out.
Absolutely. And, to kind of double down on what you said, I've done mental health first aid training as well. I think it's fantastic, and I would encourage, obviously it's kind of budget driven, but every now and again you can, I think, mind another kind of organisation who offer free places. So if and when you can utilise, I would highly encourage. But yeah, absolutely, coming back to your point, there's a couple of things just on the mental health first aiders. Like you said, the minute the mental health first aider pulls out a pen and starts writing something, I'm going to stop talking to them, because I'm thinking, hang on, I'm potentially talking about I'm being bullied, or something's happening and it's depressing me at work, and I'm thinking, well, hang on, are they going to share this with such and such, or how's this going to? So that's where the whole intention behind Spark is, look, we are a third party. We are not affiliated with that organisation. You as the employee are our main kind of focus, and that's why it's free. Even if you weren't a part of, whoever, CACHE, whoever, Spark, you would still be able to use this. So it's for you, it's always free. But so firstly, it's this kind of logging, like you said, the kind of data entry piece. And then, secondly, just on the kind of mental health first aiders, again, at times some people assume, and this is kind of, again, speaking to some other kind of mental health first aiders, that the mental health first aider is the solution. So a bit like if you get a cut, you go to your first aider and they'll apply a plaster and they'll log it down. So you've got your solution there. Or if it's kind of really severe, obviously they'll call an ambulance. I think the assumption is, look, I've got mental health first problem. I'll go to the first aider. I'll spill, my emotions, spill out everything about what I'm going through. But then, essentially, what that first aider has to do is to almost analyse, the severity, and then they will also, unfortunately, have to then signpost you on, depending on how, whether you're at crisis points. So that's where some individuals said, look, we have done this, but then we've been told, look, we've got to do this. And it's what I want Spot to be is a portal for the first aiders as well to have access to, so that they can see, right, within the customer service team, so you can differentiate. One of the things that the organisation can do is they can differentiate mental health between functions, between remote and off in the workplace people, and hopefully that can then tailor a program for these first aiders who are, doing an exceptional job to do some proactive work as well, to do some outreach. So it's a very reactionary position they're in, where, they almost, they're kind of looking around, they're identifying someone, Sandra or Imran, they used to kind of be a part of that group, and now, in the canteen, they sat by themselves. I'll go over and I'll kind of sit down with them, but you're kind of reacting based upon the behaviour. Hopefully what Spark and the Insights enables that organisation to do is to share that with the first aiders, and hopefully, they are invested in the first aid programme, and they have got a tailored individual for the warehouse team. They have got someone dedicated for the kind of office team, and you can then differentiate and see, well, hang on a sec, there's always a dip in mental health around the mid of the month, every month, without kind of exception. And what we do know is, and I keep coming back to the point of like walking demonstrably improves kind of mental health by the mood by 25% mid-month. The mental health first aiders can say, look, we're going to introduce walking Wednesdays. Everyone just down to no cost to the employee. You get an extra 20-25 minutes on your lunch break, and let's all just go out and go for a walk. And the beauty of that data is it's time-stamped, so that this time next month, you should see an uplift. And if you don't, you can go back to your kind of uplift percentages and what works and what doesn't, and you can then work on the next kind of low-hanging fruit. So for me, I'm passionate about data, I'm passionate about mental health. That's kind of that Spark in a nutshell.
What resonated with me was you were talking about, as a working class man, that it can be really difficult to talk about mental health. And I don't know whether you can tell from my accent, but I am also a very working class person, and knowing lots of blokes who have struggled. Lots of them cope by going out and drinking, or like that's how working class men socialise a lot of the time. This sounds like a tool that is really helpful, or could be really helpful, for people who maybe have some bad habits that they want to leave behind, whether that, like me, is sweets and food that isn't necessarily the best food for us, or stuff that is maybe like traditionally seen as more difficult to give up on, or maybe a little bit worse for you than the odd chocolate bar. Like, how does that sort of thing play into the development of something like this? I know, for example, if you get to the point where you're in crisis, that it can be difficult to find help if you've got other things going on, because again, that signposting between services can mean that you don't have a natural home for those sorts of help. I suppose, how do you encourage people to get involved with something like this before they really need it?
That's a really good question. So I think, from coming from this kind of working class South Asian male from an early age, you have to work through your problems. You can't kind of, if you've got a mental health problem, just brush it off kind of thing, because you're a man. You're here to kind of earn. You're here to be the breadwinner. Toxic masculinity on a massive scale. It's absolutely essential that kind of men do, and everyone kind of does kind of do this. However, also as kind of part of my journey, I have been sat with other men, having a drink in the sauna, and do you know what? We do talk about certain things which you wouldn't in a kind of normal kind of setting, and it's this kind of time and place thing, and bizarrely, and this is probably different to women, I think men probably feel more comfortable speaking to strangers about their problems than they would with their friends, because with the friends you have to almost have this toxic masculinity, coming back to that point. And this is where, if you sadly read about the horrific statements of some of the men who have lost friends, have committed suicide. There was no sign. We were having a laugh the other day. We were doing this, and it completely shocked me that kind of such and such took this step. So within Spark, what I've also kind of looked to do is there's a community section. So you're completely anonymous. You can journal, you can log whatever you want, your habits, whatever you want to read from a motivational quote perspective. You can save that. All of that is archived and no one's got access to that. However, every now and again, you might think, right, I'm going to create a post and I want to make it public. And then other people can actually comment on that post. And everything's kind of moderated. So you can report a post that's gone public. You can report a comment that's gone public. For me, one of the things that I wanted to do was to see who would kind of use that more. And my hypothesis was it would be males. And lo and behold, a lot more men have actually utilized the public community forum, call it for simplicity, section of Spark. It's called Spark Wall. And, every now and again, you'll see a comment as well that, you've got this, this is where kind of, it could be like going back to our kind of, Stone Age prehistoric roots of, brotherhood and kind of community. And I'm sure there's an equivalent sisterhood, but the sisterhood is a lot more enhanced, a lot more developed. We're still definitely in the cavemen state, sadly. But one of the things that I've kind of observed, again, this is data, is, this is definitely being utilized a lot more. So it's early days because, we've only been live for a few weeks, but that's one of the things that I'm looking at the moment with a lot of interest. And, maybe that could be enhanced into tribes or, again, looking at groupings and certain types of communities. For me, that could be an evolving thing. But for now, that's something that's very interesting and hopefully, fits quite closely, particularly with men who would feel a bit reluctant to kind of share or speak out about the problems. What I'd say is, look, if anyone is going through any kind of mental health episode, please do reach out. Please, when I say reach out, there are loads of fantastic organisations, charities, your GP, other kind of self-help groups like Andy's Mind Club, Talk Ourselves Well in Darwin, if you're in my kind of locality. Please don't feel like you're alone or there's no one out there. There is always someone out there to help, and you've just got to take that step, and you've just got to have that spark. Coming back to spark, what I would encourage is, if you aren't kind of at crisis point, please have a play around. Please feedback constructively how it can be improved, because I want that to be a fantastic user experience. I want it to be a free user experience, and then at the same time for organisations who might be listening to this, and by organisations, I mean kind of, it could be the NHS, it could be education establishments, and we know there's a lot of pressure on staff members in these establishments as well. It's not just the private sector. The public sector is being hammered as well. Costs budgets are being kind of reduced. There's a lot of pressure on fantastic members of staff, and sadly they're having to strike just to get the basic human rights. And for those organisations, regardless of who it is, what size it is, please kind of get your staff to have a look at it. I'd offer some. If they've used it for a few weeks, I'll offer you free insights for that month that they've used it, just to give you a kind of demo of the art of the possible and what you could do if you were then to kind of subscribe to it.
Thanks for listening to PodCache. If you enjoyed it, please follow or subscribe on your podcast app so you never miss an episode. You can also watch many of these conversations by heading over to cachealumni.org.uk and going to the CPD and best practice section of the site. That's cachealumni.org.uk.